The night air still clung to Elon's jacket as he slammed the door behind him, his voice echoing through the quiet apartment. "You always do this," he snapped, pacing the narrow hallway, his hands restless, searching for somewhere to land. "You tell stories that embarrass me, like I'm still that reckless boy who couldn't tie his own shoes." Grace stood by the sink, her arms folded, the glimmer of the evening's celebration still lingering faintly on her skin. "You think anyone cares about that story? They were laughing because they love you, Elon, because you're real." Her words softened as they met the sharp edges of his frustration, but neither of them knew how to step away from the fire they had lit. "This isn't about the story," Elon muttered, staring at the floor as if the answer were carved in the grain of the wood. "It's about how easy it is for you to laugh at me, how easy it would be for you to leave me behind." Grace approached him then, her bare feet soundless, her warmth a silent invitation. "I'm not going anywhere." Elon's eyes shimmered, a fleeting crack in his careful armor. "But what if you did?" His voice was nearly a whisper now, a trembling thought he had tried to keep buried. "What if I lost you?" Grace cupped his face with both hands, her thumbs brushing against his temples as if to steady his racing mind. "If I ever leave," she said, with a mischievous smile that still managed to steal his breath, "I'll find a way to haunt you. You won't get rid of me that easily." Elon let out a shaky laugh, pulling her into his arms. "Promise, promise." Their love was not perfect. It was not quiet or predictable. It lived in the cracks of their differences, the way Elon meticulously planned every detail of his life, while Grace reveled in spontaneity, leaving half-finished puzzles on the coffee table and forgotten laundry on the chairs. They poked at each other's edges, gently, playfully, never realizing that these small rituals would one day become sacred memories. Elon's work consumed him in ways even he didn't fully understand. There were days when the weight of the world's expectations sat so heavily on his shoulders that even the sound of his own name felt foreign. On those days, Grace would slide into his office, sit cross-legged on the floor, and wait in silence until he finally noticed her. "You think too much," she would say, tossing a pen cap at him. "And you think too little," he would retort, but he was already smiling. Grace believed in him when he forgot how to believe in himself. She told him he was braver than he thought, that he wasn't defined by his successes or his failures, but by the way he loved and the way he stayed. One night, at a small karaoke bar tucked between the streets of their youth, Grace stood on a makeshift stage, the microphone trembling in her hand. She sang just for him, a silly, off-key rendition of a love song that didn't care for perfection. It wasn't the melody that stayed with Elon. It was her, the way her eyes sparkled as if the whole room had disappeared, leaving only the two of them suspended in that fragile, beautiful moment. Later, Elon would recount that memory to his friends Derek and Simon, wondering aloud if he could ever be a father, if he could ever lead a life where joy wasn't always tied to achievement. "You don't have to have all the answers now," Simon had said. "You just need to be here." But even those words would not prepare Elon for the seasons that followed. His father, Errol, was a man of stone, a voice of reason, but rarely a voice of comfort. "Life moves on," Errol told him, when the shadows first crept into their lives. "You focus on what you can control." But some things cannot be controlled. Grace's illness arrived not as a storm, but as a slow unraveling. It began with subtle fatigue, a dull ache she dismissed as stress. Then came the diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless. Elon sat motionless in the sterile hospital room, his breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and terror. "We'll fight," he said, his hands clenching the bed rail as if sheer determination could alter her fate. Grace, ever the quiet flame, simply nodded. "Then we'll fight." But the battle was cruel. The treatments stole her energy, her appetite, her strength, but never her spirit. Even as her body betrayed her, Grace found ways to bring light into their dimming world. She left notes in Elon's pockets, sang softly to herself in the mornings, and insisted on wearing her favorite yellow scarf, even when the weight of it seemed too much. Elon's routines fractured under the weight of caregiving and grief. He abandoned his projects, withdrew from his friends, and clung to Grace as if sheer proximity could keep her tethered to this life. "I'm not afraid," Grace whispered one evening as they watched the sunset bleed into the horizon. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. When I go, you have to keep living. You have to find your own way." Elon shook his head, his throat tightening around the impossible. "I can't. Not without you." Grace touched his chest, just above his heart. "You'll find me here." Her decline was swift in the final weeks, as if time had grown impatient. Elon stayed by her side through every faltering breath, every painful silence, until the morning when her hand slipped from his and the room felt unbearably still. The world carried on, indifferent to his unraveling. Elon stood in the apartment they had once built together, now hollow with absence, the faint scent of Grace still lingering in the fabric of their life. He pressed his forehead to the window pane, his reflection barely recognizable in the glass. How could love fill a room so completely and then vanish so suddenly? But perhaps love never really leaves. Dear viewer, if this story is stirring something in you, a memory, a heartbeat you thought you'd forgotten, don't let it pass like a stranger on the street. I would love to hear what stayed with you. Feel free to leave a comment, or if you'd like to walk alongside me in more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe. Here we take our time. We remember, and sometimes we heal together. It was the spring of 2001. Elon Musk had just turned 29, but felt as though time had abandoned him. Days slipped through his fingers like sand, soundless and colorless, leaving him trapped in a house that no longer breathed. The funeral had passed in a haze, a parade of black coats, stiff condolences, and trembling hands on his shoulder. But when the last visitor left, when the echo of footsteps faded from the front porch, grief settled over Musk like a heavy, damp curtain. The apartment, once filled with Grace's laughter and the gentle chaos of their life together, now felt hollow, stripped of his heartbeat. Elon stopped answering the phone. He left unopened letters piled on the kitchen counter, their corners curling under the weight of neglect. Friends came knocking, Derek and Simon persistent as tides, but Elon kept the door closed, retreating deeper into himself. Derek, always the one to find humor in the cracks, arrived one afternoon with 2 concert tickets and a 6-pack of Grace's favorite beer. "Come on, man," Derek pleaded, knocking on Elon's door with the rhythm of a man who refused to give up. "Grace would have hated seeing you like this." But the silence inside remained unbroken. Simon, quieter but no less loyal, dropped off books, puzzles, even a bonsai tree, as if somehow Musk could be coaxed back into life through careful, patient tending. Yet nothing took root. Elon Musk drifted through the apartment like a ghost, wearing the same gray sweater, shuffling past reminders of Grace, her scarf draped over a chair, her hair clip still resting on the bathroom counter. Some days, he sat on the floor of their bedroom, surrounded by her clothes, clinging to the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered in the fabric. He'd press his face into her sweaters, as though inhaling deeply enough might summon her back. His father, Elon Musk, visited once, bringing with him his usual brand of pragmatic detachment. "You have to move forward, Elon," he said, standing stiffly in the doorway, as if he feared the walls themselves might collapse under the weight of sorrow. "The world doesn't stop. Grief is a passenger, but you're still the driver." But Elon couldn't find the wheel. He couldn't even find the road. There was a quiet kind of guilt in not moving on, but an even sharper one in the thought of forgetting. Musk feared that if he let go of the sadness, he would be letting go of Grace, that she would slowly disappear, not just from his life, but from the very marrow of who he was. And so he stayed suspended in that liminal space, neither here nor there, until the morning of his 30th birthday. The apartment door creaked open, just a crack, and there on the mat was a small, unmarked package. His name was scrawled on the top in a familiar, looping script, Grace's handwriting. Elon's breath caught in his throat. With trembling hands, he tore the tape and opened the box to find a cassette tape and a single yellow sticky note, "Play me." He hadn't used the old cassette player in years, but he found it buried in the back of their closet. When he pressed play, Grace's voice filled the room, soft, steady, and achingly alive. "Hi, love," she began, as if it were just another morning, as if she had only stepped out for a moment. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and I hate that. I hate that I couldn't stay longer. But I also know you. I know you're probably still sitting in the dark, wearing that same sweater, aren't you?" Elon let out a cracked laugh that felt like it didn't belong to him. Grace's voice continued, gentle but firm. "I've left you something. Actually, I've left you several somethings. Letters, instructions, little nudges. You're going to find them when you least expect it, and when you do, I need you to trust me. I need you to follow them." Musk pressed his palm to his mouth, his shoulders trembling as the weight of her words settled over him. "Let's start simple," she said. "Go buy a new shirt. Something you'd never pick for yourself. And tonight, go out with Derek and Simon. I know they've been trying. Let them in." The tape clicked to a stop, but the silence that followed was somehow louder. The letters began to arrive, slipped under his door, folded into books, tucked inside his coat pocket. Musk never figured out how she had arranged it all, but part of him didn't want to know. The mystery was a comfort. It was as if Grace had woven herself into the threads of time, orchestrating one last symphony for him to follow. Each letter was simple, deliberate, like stepping stones across a river he wasn't sure he could cross. Go for a walk. Try that new diner. Call your brother. Sing. Elon bought the shirt, soft blue, a little too bright for his taste, and when he caught his reflection in a shop window, something unfamiliar flickered in his eyes. A small, reluctant spark. That evening, he let Derek and Simon drag him out to a karaoke bar, a place they'd all visited together once long ago. The room was loud, suffused with the clinking of glasses and the faint haze of cigarette smoke. But Elon's heart was somewhere else, trapped in the echo of Grace's voice. When it was his turn, he stepped onto the stage with hesitant hands and selected song that Grace had always sung for him, though now the melody felt like a fragile thing. He sang the first lines with a shaky voice, but halfway through, the grief surged forward like a wave, overtaking him. His throat closed, and the microphone slipped from his grasp as the tears came fast, unrelenting. Derek and Simon reached him just as his legs threatened to give out, guiding him back to their table, no questions asked. Elon Musk buried his face in his hands, whispering into the quiet hum of the crowd, "I can't do this without her." But somewhere just beneath the ache, her voice still lingered, guiding, urging, softly reminding him, one step at a time. The letters did not stop. It had been weeks since Elon Musk found the first one, and now they arrived without warning, slipped beneath his door, folded into the morning paper, tucked between pages of books he hadn't opened in years. Sometimes they came in familiar envelopes. Other times they bore no markings at all. But he always recognized the handwriting. Grace's careful, looping script was impossible to mistake. Each letter held a quiet urgency, a push, a challenge. "Keep going, Elon. I left you instructions because I know you. Because I love you too much to let you stay stuck where I can no longer reach you." Some letters were small requests, a walk in the park, dinner at his favorite diner. Others asked more of him. One morning, Elon unfolded a note that read, "Go see your father. Help him clean out that old closet you've both been avoiding. There's something waiting for you there." It was the first time Grace had steered him toward Elon Musk, the man who always seemed more blueprint than flesh. His father was practical to a fault, never one for sentiment or unnecessary conversations. Still, Elon knew he had no choice but to follow the path Grace had drawn. When he arrived at his father's house, Errol stood at the door as if expecting him, though no words were exchanged about the visit's purpose. The air inside the house smelled faintly of machine oil and dust, the scent of a life spent building, fixing, calculating. They worked in silence, side by side, sorting through boxes of forgotten things. Old photo albums, tools, outdated maps. It was only when Elon pulled open a battered wooden trunk that his breath caught. There, nestled among winter coats and broken clocks, were a pair of Grace's shoes, simple, worn, soft leather flats she used to wear when they would walk for hours, no particular destination in mind. Elon lifted them gently, his thumb brushing the faint creases on the surface where her foot had once bent the material. "She left those here years ago," Errol said, his voice rough but steady. "She always said she'd come back for them." Elon held the shoes to his chest, feeling the weight of memory settle against his ribs. For the first time in weeks, he looked at his father, not as a distant figure, but as a man who had also known loss, who had perhaps, in his own silent way, grieved alongside him. "She would have liked this," Elon whispered. Errol gave a small nod, the kind that carried more emotion than words ever could. Later, Derek and Simon visited, noticing the shift in him. They gently suggested he take a step further, volunteering at an orphanage where they knew the director. "Elon, it's not just about staying busy," Simon said, leaning forward in the quiet cafe where they often met. "It's about finding yourself again. Maybe these kids can help you as much as you can help them." Reluctantly, Elon agreed, though he doubted he had much to offer anyone. His first day at the orphanage was stiff, uncertain. The children stared at him with guarded eyes, their curiosity hidden beneath layers of hard-earned caution. But when Elon sat down in front of an old, blinking computer and showed them how to bring it back to life, something shifted. Small hands reached toward the keyboard, giggles broke through the silence, and Musk found himself, for the first time in months, teaching, laughing, listening. One day, another letter appeared in his bag. "Sign up for the singing contest at the orphanage." "Yes, you heard me. Do it, even if your hands shake. Especially if your hands shake." Elon shook his head in disbelief. He could barely speak about Grace without breaking, let alone sing in front of a room full of children and strangers. He tucked the letter into his pocket, unsure if he had the courage to follow through. But Derek and Simon would not let him back down. They cornered him in the orphanage courtyard, their determination unrelenting. "She wanted this for you," Derek insisted. "You don't get to ignore that." On the evening of the contest, Elon stood behind the microphone, his pulse racing in his throat. The children gathered, their small faces alight with anticipation. He sang, not perfectly, not without stumbling, but he sang with a voice that cracked and trembled, as though Grace's spirit were woven into every note. Something inside him broke open that night. The children clapped, their laughter wrapping around him like a warm tide. And for the first time, Elon realized he was no longer singing to hold on to Grace. He was singing to find himself. The letters kept coming. One of them arrived inside a travel guide to South America, its pages folded to reveal a handwritten note. "Argentina, my home, my childhood streets. Go there, Elon. Go with Derek and Simon. There are parts of me you haven't met yet." Elon hesitated. The thought of traveling to the country that had shaped Grace before he ever knew her filled him with both longing and fear. It felt too soon, too far. But Derek and Simon, unwavering as always, reminded him that sometimes the only way forward was through the unfamiliar. They booked the flights. On their last evening before departure, the three friends gathered in Elon's apartment, raising their glasses in a quiet toast. "To Grace," Simon said, his voice low but steady, "for still knowing exactly what you need, even from across the silence." Elon smiled, his heart catching between grief and gratitude. "To Grace." The clinking of glasses echoed softly like a promise. And so, with his friends by his side and Grace's words guiding his steps, Elon boarded the plane to Argentina, a country he had never known, but one that held pieces of her waiting to be found. It was not a goodbye. It was a continuation, a journey she had begun, one that he would now walk in his own time, in his own way. When Elon Musk stepped off the plane in Argentina, a quiet, unexpected emotion settled over him. It wasn't sorrow, nor was it simple curiosity. It was something else, a strange alchemy of longing and possibility, the weight of the past walking alongside the fragile freedom of the unknown. The air in Buenos Aires was soft in April, carrying the scent of coffee from the street vendors and the faintest trace of autumn leaves beginning to gather at the corners of the sidewalks. For the first time since Grace's death, Musk wasn't trapped inside his grief. He was walking it, breathing it, folding it carefully into this new landscape. Derek and Simon had arranged everything. They stayed in a small inn on the outskirts of the city, a place that seemed pulled from the pages of a forgotten novel. Aged stone walls, windows framed by ivy, and a courtyard where stray cats basked in the sun. The hills beyond stretched toward the horizon, golden and quiet, as if waiting to be explored. It was there that they met Carolina. She worked part-time at the inn. Though she was first and foremost a musician, her guitar never far from her side. She was young, with thoughtful brown eyes and a smile that moved slowly, as though it had learned to be careful with itself. Carolina's presence was effortless, warm, and it wasn't long before she and Elon found themselves speaking more often, sharing quiet breakfasts and meandering conversations that had no destination. Elon felt something shift within him as he explored the Argentine countryside with his friends and with Carolina. The vineyards stretched wide beneath the pale sky, and the rolling fields carried the faint hum of distant rivers. He felt alive, not fully healed, not entirely himself, but undeniably alive. One afternoon, another letter from Grace arrived. It was tucked into the pages of a local guidebook left on the nightstand, as if Grace had orchestrated the moment herself. "Elon," she had written, "you've always avoided skating because you said it made you feel foolish, like you didn't know how to fall properly. I want you to rent a pair of skates while you're there. I want you to fall. And when you do, I want you to laugh. Trust me, it matters." Musk stared at the page for a long time, feeling the stubbornness rise in him, the quiet voice that insisted he didn't need to do this. But somewhere underneath the resistance was the knowledge that Grace had known him better than he knew himself. So he went. He rented the skates. And within minutes, he found himself sprawled on the smooth pavement of a small plaza, his palms scraped, his dignity bruised, and his laughter echoing through the open air. Carolina had been watching, her hands clasped over her mouth in surprise. When she saw him laughing, truly laughing, she joined him, her own giggles bubbling into the sky. She knelt beside him, offered him a hand, and said in her soft, melodic accent, "You fall well." Elon looked at her, his chest still heaving from the laughter, and for a fleeting moment, the ache of missing Grace didn't consume him. It lingered, as it always would, but it no longer ruled him. Over the next few days, Carolina shared her own stories of her father, a tango musician who had passed when she was a teenager, of the way she still sang his favorite songs at small local cafes. There was a gentleness in her, a familiarity in the way she carried her memories with pride instead of pain. Derek, ever the adventurer, met a local guide named Sophia, whose humor and charm were impossible to resist. They slipped into an easy, playful romance, the kind that needed no promises, just shared sunrises and long, wandering conversations. Simon, always the quiet observer, received news from home. His girlfriend was pregnant. He read the letter with trembling hands, his breath caught between terror and unspeakable joy. It was Elon who placed a steady hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "We're here," Elon told him. "We'll figure it out together." The nights in Argentina deepened into something Musk hadn't expected. There was a softness to the way Carolina sang by the fire, her guitar balanced on her knee, her voice carrying something tender yet unsaid. One evening, during a quiet dinner on the inn's terrace, Carolina sang a song that arrested Elon where he sat. It was a melody Grace used to hum in their kitchen, a tune so particular, so intertwined with his memories that it almost shattered him. When the song ended, Elon's voice was soft, cautious. "Where did you learn that?" Carolina smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "A long time ago. There was an exchange student when I was in school. Her name was Grace. She was unforgettable." Elon's heart slowed, his hands steadying on the edge of the table. "Grace was my wife." Carolina's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Grace Musk." "Yes." Carolina's expression softened into something tender, something stitched with fate. She used to sit with me in the park and tell me about this boy she had left behind. She said he was brilliant, a little stubborn, and that she would marry him one day. The weight of the connection settled between them like a sacred thread, delicate but unbreakable. Grace had already been writing his story in places he hadn't yet been. In that moment, Musk realized something profound. Grace had not simply left instructions to guide him forward. She had woven herself into the places, the people, the music he would one day find. She had led him here not to let go of her, but to understand that love could ripple beyond the borders of grief. Elon looked at Carolina, at the flicker of surprise and memory in her eyes, and felt something loosen in his chest. He could honor Grace, and he could also keep walking. The two were not in opposition. They were perhaps the same path. The return flight to California was long, but Elon Musk didn't mind. Somewhere between the coastlines and the cloudless skies, he began to notice something had shifted within him. A loosening of the tight grip grief had held on his chest. Argentina had not erased the ache, but had softened its edges. By the time he stepped into his apartment, the space no longer felt like a tomb. The walls, which once seemed to echo with Grace's absence, now felt quieter, calmer, almost ready to hold new stories. Elon carefully unpacked his bag, moving with a tenderness he hadn't known before. From the folds of his clothes, he retrieved small treasures. A hand-carved wooden trinket Carolina had given him as a parting gift, a simple piece shaped like a compass. "For when you forget where you're going," she had said, placing it gently in his palm. It now sat on his nightstand, a silent reminder that not all journeys were measured in miles. Derek was the first to visit. His face lit up with a kind of happiness that Elon hadn't seen in a long time. "I asked Sophia to marry me," Derek announced, his voice vibrating with barely contained joy. She said yes. Elon pulled him into a fierce hug, genuine laughter rising in his throat. It felt good to celebrate someone else's happiness, to step outside his own sorrow, and simply witness the unfolding of life. Simon soon shared his own news. His girlfriend's pregnancy, once a tremble of uncertainty, had become a steady, glowing certainty. His family embraced the news with open arms, surrounding him with warm support and endless questions about names and nursery colors. Elon watched his friends stepping into new seasons of their lives, and instead of feeling left behind, he felt something like gratitude blooming quietly within him. Late one evening, sorting through the scattered letters Grace had left, he found another. The envelope was worn, its edges softened by time. "Elon," she had written, "you've spent so long building for others. I want you to build something for yourself now. Something that makes your heart catch fire. Something that isn't just survival." The words struck a chord he hadn't touched in years. He had always been driven, but for so long his ambitions had been wrapped around proving something to the world, or perhaps to himself. For days, he wandered through bookstores, cafes, and quiet parks, allowing his mind to drift where it wanted to go. Ideas flickered at the edges of his thoughts, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to take shape. He started sketching, cars mostly, designs that had lived in his imagination since he was a boy, lines and curves that made his heart race. He scribbled in the margins of newspapers, on napkins, in the notebooks Grace had once gifted him. He experimented with building simple applications, something to awaken the problem-solving side of his brain that had long gone dormant. In the quiet hum of his apartment, Elon felt the spark of possibility flicker to life again. In these quiet hours, he often remembered his late-night talks with Grace. How they used to dream together, sprawled across their tiny living room floor, mapping out wild, impossible futures with marker pens and tea-stained notebooks. "You always think you have to follow the rules," she would tease him, "but you were born to make new ones." The memory didn't crush him now, it steadied him. His father, Errol, began visiting more often, though their conversations remained cautious, circling around safe topics before landing on something deeper. One afternoon, as they sipped coffee in Elon's kitchen, Errol surprised him. "You know," Errol began, his eyes distant, When your mother passed, I told myself I had to stay upright. Keep working. Keep moving. I thought that's what strength was. But maybe I just didn't know how to fall. Elon looked at his father, and for the first time, saw him not as an unreachable figure, but as a man still quietly carrying his own sorrow. We all fall, Elon said softly. Grace made me fall on purpose. She wanted me to see I could get back up. Errol's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Seems she taught you well. Their conversations grew easier after that. There were still long pauses, still silences neither of them knew how to fill, but there was also something warmer, something waiting to grow. Elon's brother Kimball called one evening, his voice bright and full of his usual optimism. You're still one of the most brilliant people I know, Kimball said, cutting through Elon's lingering doubts. But brilliance doesn't mean much if you're not building something you believe in. Maybe it's time you start. Elon's response was quiet but sure. I think I'm ready. Another letter arrived a few days later. Start small, Grace had written. Sketch the car. Build the dream. Even if it seems silly at first. Even if you think you're not ready. I wish I could see it, but I know it will be extraordinary. Just like you. Her belief in him pulsed through the page, warming the places in him that had grown cold. Encouraged by Derek and Simon, Elon began investing more time in his sketches. He pored over design books, stayed up late mapping concepts, scribbled notes across his kitchen counter. The spark was no longer just a flicker. It had become a steady flame. In the weeks that followed, his apartment transformed. Drafting paper covered the tables, car models lined the shelves, and the quiet hum of possibility filled the air. Derek and Simon became his sounding boards, offering both practical feedback and unfiltered enthusiasm. You're coming back to life, Simon observed one evening as he scanned Elon's latest design. And Grace, I think she'd be proud. Elon's gaze lingered on his sketches, his heart settling into something that finally felt right. He was beginning to dream again, not just for Grace, but for himself. And maybe, just maybe, that was what she had been guiding him toward all along. There was something steady about the way Elon Musk moved now. Not rushed, not weightless, but deliberate, as though he had finally begun to step into his own rhythm. The sketches that once lived in the margins of his life now filled entire notebooks. What had started as hesitant lines had grown into detailed designs. Each curve of the bodywork, each contour of the interior, it wasn't just about cars anymore. It was about building something that could move people forward, something that belonged entirely to him. Elon had made his decision. He would pursue this with both hands, with his whole heart. He would build his own line of electric vehicles. Not for acclaim, not for anyone's expectations. For the first time, he would build something for himself. Workshops in Palo Alto became his new classrooms. He sat among engineers, designers, and dreamers, absorbing every piece of knowledge he could. He asked questions no one else thought to ask. He lingered long after the sessions ended, scribbling ideas furiously, as if he feared they might evaporate if he paused. And then, as if the story had been waiting for this precise moment, Carolina reappeared. She arrived in Palo Alto on a cool, sunlit afternoon, her guitar slung over her shoulder, her smile exactly as he remembered it, slow, sincere, a little curious. They hadn't made promises in Argentina. There had been no confessions, no unfinished sentences left hanging between them. But there had been something, an understanding, a softness neither of them had tried to label. Elon, she greeted him, her accent folding gently into his name. I thought I'd see your city. Maybe see you. He felt something ease in his chest, something warm and uncomplicated. I'm glad you're here. He introduced her to Derek and Simon over coffee. Derek was instantly at ease with her, quick to tease Elon, while Simon, always the quiet anchor, simply observed and smiled, understanding more than he said. Together, they wandered through the streets of Palo Alto, a city Elon had walked 1,000 times before, but somehow it all looked different now. Carolina noticed the details, the way the light touched the tops of the trees, the hidden murals tucked into quiet alleyways, the bookstores that Elon had passed but never entered. "You've been living here," she said one afternoon, "but I don't think you've really seen it until now." With Carolina's gentle insistence, he began to explore the city as though he were a traveler again, free from the shadows of the past. They spent afternoons in used record stores, evenings at small cafes where local musicians played, and mornings sitting in parks just to watch the slow rhythm of the world. Yet even as their days unfolded with lightness, Elon hesitated to open his heart fully. The memory of Grace still lingered, a quiet pulse beneath everything. He wondered if it would be disloyal to feel more than friendship for Carolina, if stepping forward meant stepping away from Grace. But Carolina never pressed. She met him where he was, offering him not expectations, but simple companionship. She was patient with his silences, tender with his hesitations. When Derek married Sophia in an intimate ceremony by the ocean, Elon was there, standing beside his friend, his voice steady as he gave a heartfelt speech about love, resilience, and the courage to begin again. "I've learned," he said, his eyes briefly meeting Carolina's across the gathering, "that some stories don't end when we think they do. Sometimes they just take new shapes." Simon's life expanded too. His partner gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and when they asked Elon to be her godfather, he felt the weight and honor of it settle into his bones. It was as though the fabric of his life was slowly weaving itself back together, stitch by careful stitch. The letters from Grace continued to arrive, but their tone had changed. They grew quieter, more reflective. In one, she wrote, "There aren't many letters left now. I can almost see you from where I am, and you're doing so well. I know you might miss my words when they stop arriving, but that's the point, love. I was never meant to stay forever. My voice was only meant to guide you back to your own." Elon sat with that letter for a long time, his thumb brushing the edge of the paper until it softened beneath his touch. He had come to rely on her letters, on the comfort they brought, but now, as he read her gentle goodbye, he felt something else, gratitude. In another letter, she urged him, "Write your own story now, Elon, with new ink in your own hand. Don't write it for me. Write it because you finally remembered how to dream for yourself." For days, he thought about what that meant. He realized that all along, Grace's greatest gift had not been the letters. It had been teaching him how to keep moving, how to choose life over stillness, how to love himself enough to keep building. His connection with Carolina deepened, slowly, naturally. Their friendship remained the foundation, but there was something growing there, quiet, patient, something that didn't need to rush. Elon found comfort in her presence, in the way she never filled the silence with more than it could hold. Together, they sat on benches in shaded parks, browsed weekend markets, shared stories that no longer felt too fragile to tell. Carolina didn't try to heal him. She simply walked beside him as he learned to heal himself. One evening, they visited a local jazz club. Elon watched Carolina close her eyes as the music filled the space around them, her foot tapping softly in rhythm. He felt the warmth of the moment settle over him, not as a replacement for the love he had lost, but as a reminder that life, even after unimaginable loss, had room for new beginnings. And as the notes lingered in the air, Elon realized that Grace had never asked him to let her go. She had only asked him to carry her forward, with him, not behind him. And maybe now he was finally ready. The final letter came on a morning that felt unremarkable at first, a quiet Tuesday, the sky stretched wide and pale, the air still with the early hush of the day. Elon Musk had stopped expecting them. The cadence of Grace's letters had slowed over the past few weeks, as if they, too, had been preparing to fade gently from his life. Yet there it was, waiting on his doorstep, her handwriting unmistakable, the last of her words sealed in a simple white envelope. He sat with it for hours before he dared to open it, his thumb running over the edge of the paper, as though he could prolong the moment by touch alone. He knew what this letter meant. It wasn't another task or another step forward. It was the closing note, the final gift. When he finally unfolded the paper, her voice filled the room once more. "My dearest Elon," she began, "if you're reading this, it means we've reached the part one always feared, but somehow knew we would find. I hope by now you've begun to live again, Not for me, not because I asked, but because you remembered how. Elon's throat tightened, his fingers gripping the letter as though the ink might fade if he let go. Thank you for loving me the way you did. Thank you for letting me love you back. But the truth is, even if I were still here, life would have asked us both to grow apart in some ways. Even together, we would have had to learn how to live our own separate journeys. That's what life is, isn't it? A series of letting go, of trusting that love can stretch across time and distance without breaking. She didn't offer more instructions. There were no more tasks. Only this. P.S. I'll always be with you. Elon folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his chest, and allowed himself to sit with the fullness of it, the sorrow, the gratitude, the quiet release. The ache hadn't vanished, but something inside him had softened. He wasn't holding her in place anymore. He was letting her walk alongside him. He gathered the letters one by one, each of them worn at the edges, ink slightly faded from being read and reread. He placed them in a wooden box lined with soft velvet, a treasure not of grief, but of memory. It would not be locked away. It would live on his shelf, within reach, but no longer in the center of his life. Elon brought the box to his father's house that afternoon. He had wanted to share the last letter, to let his father see the full journey Grace had led him through. Errol read it slowly, his normally steady hands trembling just enough to betray his usual composure. "She was remarkable," Errol murmured, his voice hushed, but not distant. "And you've grown into someone she'd be proud of." They sat together in rare, comfortable silence, the weight of their shared history settling quietly between them. For the first time, their conversation didn't need to work around grief. It was allowed to pass through it. The closeness that had once seemed unreachable now felt natural, like something that had always been waiting to surface. Elon's own life began to take shape with more deliberate steps. The collection of electric vehicles he had dreamed of, the sketches, the prototypes, the late nights of building and rebuilding, finally emerged into the world. When it came time to name them, he didn't hesitate. One car bore the name Aurora, after the soft light Grace had always loved chasing in the sky. Another Alma, which Carolina had taught him meant soul in Spanish. Each name carried a story, a heartbeat, a thread that tied his past to his future. Derek and Simon were there, steadfast as ever, celebrating his milestones as if they were their own. They cheered at the launch, they challenged him to new dreams, they reminded him that life, though unpredictable, could be deeply good. Carolina, too, became an enduring presence. Their bond had grown carefully, like something tended with patience and respect. Though their paths had not yet unfolded into romance, their friendship had become one of quiet trust and easy laughter. "I think I should go back to Argentina for a while," she told Elon over coffee one afternoon. "There are things I need to finish there. Things I want to understand about myself." He smiled, a smile that reached his eyes this time. "You'll come back." "Maybe," she said, her eyes soft. "Or maybe you'll find me there someday." There were no promises, no dramatic farewells. Only the comfort of knowing that whatever shape their story took, it would be enough. After she left, Elon found himself revisiting the places that once belonged to his life with Grace. He walked to the park bench where they had met, a place worn by time, but still holding the echoes of their first conversation. He sat there in the stillness, not to chase a memory, but to offer it his gratitude. There was no more pretending that he could leave her behind, nor any need to keep her frozen in the past. Grace lived within him, transformed now, a quiet pulse in the rhythm of his days, a familiar breeze that passed without warning, a soft whisper that reminded him to keep choosing life. Elon rose from a bench and began walking, his steps steady, his heart less burdened. The streets of Palo Alto stretched ahead, bright with afternoon light, no longer the corridors of sorrow they once had been. He moved forward not as a man escaping his grief, but as one who had learned to carry it with grace, to fold it gently into his becoming. And so he walked, his hands in his pockets, his gaze lifted, not to search for what was gone, but to meet what was waiting. The day Elon Musk presented his project to the local press was nothing grand, nothing worthy of a front-page headline. It was a small gathering at a modest conference hall in downtown Palo Alto, a few journalists, a handful of curious engineers, and a table lined with Elon's meticulously sketched designs. There were no banners, no flashing cameras, just his quiet confidence and the weight of what had brought him to this moment. As Elon spoke, something inside him settled. For the first time, he wasn't speaking to prove himself. He wasn't standing there to outrun his grief or fill an empty space. He was sharing something he had built, not from pain, but from possibility. He detailed his vision, a line of electric vehicles, efficient and elegant, designed not just to transport people, but to reimagine how they could move through the world. His hands moved with measured energy, tracing the lines of his blueprints as he spoke of sustainability, accessibility, and the future. After the presentation, as the crowd thinned, a man approached him, a quiet, sharply dressed investor with a reputation for recognizing bold ideas. He introduced himself as the founder of a respected Silicon Valley company and lingered over Elon's designs longer than anyone else. "You've built something people will need," the man said, his voice steady. "But more than that, you've built something they'll want to be part of." He offered Elon a chance, funding, mentorship, the first step toward something that might grow beyond what Elon had dared to imagine. The words left Elon breathless, but his answer came with remarkable calm. "I'm ready," Elon said, and he meant it. The days that followed were woven with new energy. Meetings, designs, prototypes. His life no longer felt like something he was waiting to reclaim. It was something he was living actively, fully. His friends watched him with quiet pride, each of them knowing how far he had come. One evening, as Elon walked into his father's driveway, he stopped short, his breath catching in his throat. There, parked neatly in front of the house, was one of Elon's first completed vehicles. His father leaned against it, arms crossed, a rare softness in his expression. "I wanted to be part of what you're building," Errol said simply, running his hand along the curve of the car. "Not just to watch, to believe in it with you." Elon's throat tightened, but this time, there were no walls between them. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with something he didn't try to hide. They rode together that afternoon, the quiet hum of the electric engine filling the silences that no longer needed to be bridged with words. They spoke of old memories, of grace, of beginnings that never seemed possible but somehow had found their way. Later that week, Elon visited Derek and Simon to mark the small, steady victories. The familiar warmth of their company was a comfort Elon now welcomed without hesitation. They shared beers on the back porch, the laughter easy, the stories unguarded. Simon's baby girl, now a few months old, gripped Elon's finger with surprising strength, her tiny hand wrapped tightly around his. Simon looked on, a quiet invitation in his gaze. "She'll need you around," Simon said, "not just as a name on a certificate, as family." Elon nodded, the weight of that role settling gently over him. It no longer frightened him to stay, to show up, to matter. The roots of friendship, once fragile, had deepened into something that felt like home. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Argentina. The handwriting was unmistakable, Carolina's soft, careful script. "Dear Elon, I hope your days are full and your city feels new in your eyes. I think of you often, with affection, with curiosity. I wonder where your steps will lead you next. I've been playing music in the cafes we once talked about, and I carry your story with me." There was no expectation in her words, no pressure to reply, just a window left open for a future that neither of them felt the need to define. Elon sat with the letter, his heart steady, as he folded the paper and penned his response. He wrote not out of longing, but out of quiet joy. "Carolina, thank you for reminding me that life can be soft again. I don't know where our roads will meet, but I'm glad they've crossed at all. Elon." Their connection remained alive, not tied to geography or urgency, but to mutual care, a bond that could stretch gently across oceans and time. Elon's days settled into something he had never dared to hope for, a rhythm he enjoyed. He was comfortable being alone now, walking to cafes, reading in parks, listening to the soft hum of his workshop as new ideas came to life. Loneliness no longer chased him. His own company was enough. One morning, he visited the park where he and Grace had spent so many of their early days. The bench was still there, a little worn now, the wood bearing the faint imprint of seasons past. He sat with his coffee, watching the children race across the grass, their laughter ringing in the air like music. A small boy tripped, fell, and sprang back up, unbothered, already chasing the next game. Elon smiled, warmed by the resilience he saw in that simple moment. He found inspiration in those small, ordinary scenes. They reminded him of what Grace had tried to teach him all along. Life was not waiting to be perfect. It was waiting to be lived. When he rose from the bench, he didn't look back. He walked forward, his steps steady, his shoulders lighter, his gaze lifted toward the streets that now belonged to him. And somewhere, gently carried on the breeze, he still felt her presence, not as a weight, but as a whisper, familiar and kind. P.S. I'll always be with you. Orders for Elon Musk's electric cars began to arrive with quiet steadiness. What had once been a fragile dream, carefully sketched on napkins and workshop tables, was now taking its first real steps into the world. His workshop, once sparse and echoing, now hummed with activity, machines running, blueprints spread wide, his team moving with purpose. Elon had not imagined success would feel like this. There was no thunderous applause, no overwhelming spotlight. Instead, there was a steady rhythm, a calm, deliberate unfolding of what was meant to be. Still, he found himself drawn back, time and again, to the park where he and Grace had walked so many mornings ago. It had become less a place of sorrow and more a quiet sanctuary. He would sit on their old bench, coffee in hand, and watch the world move gently around him. The children still laughed, the trees still caught the morning light in their leaves, and life, in all its soft persistence, continued. One afternoon, while reviewing new orders, a particular request caught his attention. A man had ordered 3 cars from the newly launched collection, specifying the Aurora model, Grace's namesake. In the handwritten note accompanying the order, the customer explained, "I'm purchasing these in memory of my late wife, who believed the future would always find us if we kept moving toward it." Elon's breath hitched as he read those words. He folded the letter slowly, his thumb resting on the signature, the story beneath the order settling deep within him. Grief had not chosen him alone. Love, it seemed, had a way of echoing forward, through memories, through objects, through the things we build for those we've lost. He found himself reflecting on this as he met Derek for coffee later that week. Derek's energy was still vibrant, but now carried the edges of exhaustion and the softening of responsibility. "Sophia and we're expecting our first," Derek said, his grin both wide and weary. "It's exciting and terrifying, mostly terrifying." Elon chuckled, feeling the weight and beauty of this next chapter for his friend. "I think terrifying is a good sign. It means you're paying attention." Simon, too, had begun to wrestle with the realities of parenthood. The sleepless nights, the constant second-guessing, the fragile responsibility of raising a life. In the quiet of Elon's workshop, Simon often sat across from him, voicing doubts he rarely shared with others. "Some days I don't know if I'm enough," Simon admitted, his voice steady but low. "Like I'm doing everything wrong." "You're showing up," Elon said simply. "And sometimes that's all someone needs." The bond between them deepened, not just in laughter, but in these moments of vulnerability, where they let themselves be seen fully, without armor. Elon's growing presence in the automotive world led him to a design fair where he met new minds, new collaborators, people who believed in the kind of future he was trying to shape. He navigated the event with confidence he had once thought lost, no longer the man hiding behind someone else's memory. Then, as if life had perfectly timed it, a new letter arrived from Argentina. "Dear Elon," Carolina wrote, "the music here still wraps around me like the streets we walked. I've been playing in small theaters, chasing songs I used to only dream of singing. I think of you when I perform, how you reminded me to notice the light in forgotten places. I hope you're still building things that carry your heart forward." Elon smiled softly as he read, feeling no urgency, no ache. Carolina's place in his life remained steady, like a quiet note that lingered long after the music paused. He no longer wondered what their future would hold. He simply trusted it would unfold as it needed to. His father surprised him with a dinner one evening, a rare gesture, carefully arranged without fanfare. The small restaurant was quiet, their table tucked near the window. "I wanted to mark this chapter," Errol said, his steel blue eyes steady. "You've built something remarkable. I didn't always say it, but I saw it." They talked of a company, of orders, of the steady growth, but slowly their conversation wandered toward the past. "You and Grace," Errol began, his voice low, as though testing the weight of the words. "I didn't understand it fully back then. I didn't know how to speak about it. But I admired the way you loved her, how you didn't hold back." Elon listened quietly, surprised by the softness in his father's tone. "I used to think holding back was strength," Errol continued. "But maybe I was just afraid of losing too much." Elon's gaze softened. "You lost Mom." "And others," Errol admitted, his voice briefly catching. "We all carry our scars, Elon. Some we show, some we don't." They sat together, father and son, no longer separated by the silence that once stretched between them. In this gentle space, they had finally begun to understand one another, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, honest words. Derek and Simon later organized a small launch event to promote Elon's growing brand. They handled the details, rallied the guests, and made sure Elon knew he wouldn't be walking this road alone. At the gathering, Elon paused to look around, a room filled with friends, with laughter, with stories layered on top of stories. He no longer felt like a man tethered to his past. He was standing firmly in his present. Even now, as he continued to design, to create, to build a future that bore his name, he understood that Grace remained part of it, not as something unfinished, but as something lovingly woven into the fabric of who he had become. Her echo was no longer sharp. It was soft, a whisper that lived not in the shadows, but in the spaces where light now settled. He was not building to outrun the past. He was building to carry it with him. The launch event for Elon Musk's first automotive collection unfolded in a warm, unpretentious space filled with people who had come to celebrate not just the cars, but the quiet, steady resilience of the man behind them. The polished floors reflected the soft glow of evening lights, and the buzz of conversation lingered gently in the air. Elon moved through the crowd with measured comfort, accepting congratulations, exchanging handshakes, and listening to genuine words of admiration. But his steps slowed when a familiar voice called his name from across the room. "Elon." He turned and immediately recognized her, Danielle. Her hair was darker now, cropped just above her shoulders, but her eyes, wide and bright, were exactly as he remembered. They had known each other in college, before life had scattered them in separate directions. They drifted apart without conflict, their paths simply unraveling along different threads. "Danielle," he greeted, surprised but sincerely pleased. "It's been years." "I heard about your project," she said, her smile soft but tinged with curiosity. "I thought I'd come see what you've built." They fell into conversation easily, the old familiarity sliding back between them like a favorite song rediscovered. But even as Danielle's laughter warmed the space around them, Elon felt the quiet barrier still lingering within him, a part of his heart not yet ready to reach toward something new. Danielle seemed to sense it. She didn't press, didn't push. She allowed their reunion to settle into something comfortable, a friendship rekindled without expectations. They began to meet for coffee, to walk through the parks Elon loved, to exchange long, thoughtful conversations where time didn't feel urgent. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the shade of an oak tree, Danielle's words caught him off guard. "I always had feelings for you," she admitted, her gaze lowered, as if the confession might somehow disturb the air between them. "Back then, I just never said anything. You always seemed to belong to something bigger, even before I knew what that was." Elon was quiet, touched but unsure of what to offer in return. "Danielle, my story, it's been complicated." She smiled, not with disappointment, but with understanding. "That's why I'm here now. Not to rush anything. just to know you as you are today." In return, Elon opened a door he hadn't opened for many. He told her about Grace, about the letters, about the journey that had carried him from grief to possibility. He spoke of Argentina, of Carolina, of the steps he had taken, and the ones that still felt uncertain. Danielle listened without interrupting, holding his story with care, as though it was a fragile object entrusted to her hands. Sharing this with her lightened something in him. It was not a letting go, it was a letting in. In the middle of these new beginnings, joy arrived in the form of Derek's newborn daughter. She was a delicate bundle of life, and her arrival folded a new kind of softness into their circle. Derek, who had always worn confidence like a second skin, now trembled with the weight of fatherhood, his voice cracking as he introduced his daughter to his friends. Simon, too, was navigating his own balancing act. He had returned to work, cautiously stepping back into a world that no longer revolved solely around diapers and midnight lullabies. Elon became his quiet support, often stepping in to help care for the baby when the hours stretched thin. Those shared moments, rocking the baby in the soft quiet of Simon's home, heating bottles, watching tiny hands explore the world, wove Elon deeper into the fabric of their lives. He wasn't just passing through, he belonged here. In this season of gentle routines and soft connections, Errol found his place too. Surprisingly, he seemed to enjoy Danielle's company, often joining their coffee outings, sharing stories of his own youth with a dry humor Elon rarely witnessed. One evening, as they all sat around Elon's kitchen table, Derek, Simon, Danielle, and Errol, the room hummed with a warmth that felt settled like home. There was no grand event, no dramatic shift, just the quiet, steady presence of people who had chosen to stay. It was in this space, surrounded by this found family, that another letter arrived from Argentina. "Dear Elon," Carolina's words began, "I've been thinking about the road we never finished walking. If you ever find yourself back here, I would love to show you the rest. No expectations, just an open door." Elon folded the letter carefully, his thoughts caught between the steady life he had built and the distant pull of something unfinished. Argentina wasn't just a place, it was a chapter he had walked away from, a thread he had left gently resting in the past. Danielle noticed his hesitation in the days that followed. "You should go," she said simply, as they sat beneath the same oak tree where she had once confessed her feelings. "Life doesn't wait, Elon. It never has." He looked at her unsure. "I'm not even certain what I'm looking for there." "Maybe you're not looking for anything," she replied. "Maybe you just need to let yourself arrive." Her words settled in him, not as a push, but as an invitation. For the first time, the idea of returning to Argentina didn't feel like clinging to the past. It felt like honoring the steps he hadn't yet taken. With quiet resolve, Elon began to prepare for the trip. This time, he wasn't driven by desperation or sorrow. He wasn't chasing a ghost. He was going for himself, to see what remained, to see what could grow. On the morning of his departure, Derek and Simon met him at the airport. Derek clapped him on the back, offering a wide grin. "Bring us back something good," Derek joked. "And maybe this time, don't fall on your skates." Simon hugged him briefly, his calm voice steady. "Take your time, Elon. We'll be here." Elon smiled genuinely, his heart light in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't a journey to retrieve something lost. It was a journey to meet himself, fully, freely, and without fear. The moment Elon Musk stepped onto Argentinian soil again, he realized the city no longer carried the same weight it once had. The streets felt familiar, but not haunted. The air was still rich with the scent of roasted coffee and sun-warmed stone, but this time, it didn't cling to him like unfinished business. He wasn't here to search for pieces of grace. He wasn't here to prove something to himself. He had come to see what still lived within him. The small inn where he had stayed years before welcomed him like an old friend, its ivy-covered walls unchanged, its windows still dappled with soft afternoon light. The owners recognized him, their faces creased in smiles, and led him to the same room he had once occupied. Elon accepted it with a quiet nod, grateful for the symmetry. Carolina met him on the steps, her presence as effortlessly warm as it had always been. Her long, chestnut brown hair now carried a few sunlightened strands, and her eyes, still deep and lively, now glowed with a quiet steadiness. "Elon," she said softly, her arms open but not urgent. "It's good to see you." "It's good to be here," he replied, meaning every word. There was no hesitation in their reunion, but there was also no expectation. Carolina made no assumptions about why he had come. She welcomed him with kindness, offering time and space, trusting that whatever they shared would unfold naturally. Their conversations stretched into the evenings, filling the quiet courtyards and shaded trails where the city softened into the countryside. They spoke not only of what they had lost, but of what still waited to be found. Elon told her about his growing company, about Derek's daughter, about Simon's sleepless nights, and the tender gravity of helping to raise a child not his own. Carolina shared stories of her music, of small performances in local cafes, of how she had finally gathered the courage to write her own songs instead of covering the voices of others. She had built something for herself, steady and true, and Elon found himself admiring the quiet strength in her journey. One afternoon, she introduced him to new friends, musicians, artists, travelers, people who welcomed Elon without curiosity or caution. They simply accepted his presence, allowing him to slip into their easy rhythm. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a visitor to his own life. As the days passed, Elon realized the bond between him and Carolina was undeniable, but no longer felt like something urgent or fragile. It was a connection that didn't need to be defined. It was enough to exist, to breathe, to grow at its own pace. Carolina led him to a place she thought he should see, a quiet lake at the edge of the village where the water stretched wide and still, catching the soft silver of the sky. She explained that Grace had once fished there during her time in Argentina, and Elon felt his breath catch in his chest, not from pain, but from the strange, gentle closeness of it. They sat on the grass for a long while, watching the small ripples drift across the water. Elon didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his pocket and unfolded a simple note he had written the night before. "Thank you for walking with me. I'll carry you forward." He folded the paper carefully, weighing it with a small stone, and placed it at the edge of the lake, just where the water lapped softly against the shore. It wasn't goodbye. It wasn't an ending. It was simply a letting go, the final thread loosened, not lost. As they left the lake, a lightness settled over him. For the first time since Grace's death, he didn't feel trapped by memory. He wasn't carrying the weight of unfinished stories. He was simply moving forward. Elon and Carolina walked the winding trails of the Argentine hills, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply sharing the quiet. The silences between them no longer felt like spaces to be filled. They were comfortable, natural, steady. One evening, Carolina invited him to a small local pub. The room was filled with laughter, the clink of glasses, the hum of an old piano in the corner. When someone offered Elon the chance to sing, he didn't shrink away. He didn't feel the tremble of fear that had once locked him in place. He took the microphone, and though his voice cracked at first, he sang, not for grace, not to hold on to the past, but because in that moment he wanted to. There was joy in it, pure and simple. When he finished, Carolina clapped with quiet pride, her smile reaching her eyes. "To new beginnings," she toasted, her glass raised gently toward his. Elon smiled, the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep and real. To new beginnings. The days in Argentina unfolded softly, but Elon knew he wouldn't stay. He had found what he came for, not answers but peace. He was ready to return, ready to continue building the life he had begun to claim as his own. On the morning of his departure, Carolina walked him to the bus stop. The sun warmed the cobblestone street, and the quiet buzz of the village stirred in the distance. They hugged, not as people clinging to something unfinished, but as two souls grateful for having crossed paths. "There's no closing door here," Carolina said softly, her chestnut hair brushing his shoulder. "Come back if you ever feel like it. Or not. We're good either way." Elon held her a moment longer, the weight of gratitude pressing gently in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." She smiled, stepping back, her hands in the pockets of her soft linen jacket. "Safe travels, Elon." As the bus pulled away, Elon felt no ache of leaving, no fear of what he might miss. He carried everything he needed. This journey had not been about finding Grace. It had always been about finding himself. Returning to Palo Alto felt different this time. The streets no longer whispered unfinished memories to Elon Musk. The familiar rhythm of the city, once heavy with silent echoes, now welcomed him with a quiet steadiness. For the first time in years, Elon felt like he belonged not to the past, nor to someone else's dream, but to his own life. Something inside him had finally settled. He walked into his workshop with calm purpose, no longer chasing ghosts or waiting for permission to begin. His electric vehicles stood before him, not as symbols of survival, but as reflections of who he had become. He gathered his team and quietly made a decision. He would relaunch his automotive brand, this time not under the shadow of borrowed ideas, not tucked behind the safety of anonymity. He would sign it with his own name. His signature would live on the cars, on the vision, on the work that was now fully, proudly his. The response was immediate. Orders increased, press interest grew, and the quiet admiration from his peers began to reach him in ways it never had before. Not because he sought validation, but because people recognized something authentic in what he was building. Throughout this new season, Danielle remained a steady presence. She never asked more than Elon could give. Their friendship was soft, patient, free of any expectation. They shared coffee, long walks, and evenings filled with conversation that neither one felt the need to rush. Elon found comfort in the simplicity of it, a space where he could simply be, without performing, without proving. His father, Errol, became his most loyal customer, purchasing each new model with genuine pride. He would show the cars to his friends, speak of Elon's work with a quiet dignity, and offer subtle but heartfelt praise that lingered longer than any public recognition. "It's good work, Elon," Errol said one afternoon, resting his hand briefly on his son's shoulder. "You've built something that matters." Derek and Simon remained by his side, their bond unchanged. They celebrated Elon's milestones as if they were their own, raising glasses, offering encouragement, teasing him just enough to keep his feet on the ground. When an invitation arrived to present his collection at an international automotive exhibition, Elon paused to absorb the weight of it. It was a moment he would have once feared he didn't deserve. But now he embraced it, understanding fully that this story was his, unfolding on his terms, shaped by his hands. On a quiet Sunday morning, Elon returned to the park that had held so many pieces of his journey. He walked slowly, letting his feet guide him to the familiar bench beneath the tall oak. As he sat, his fingers brushed against something beneath the wood, a worn notebook, edges frayed, pages softened by time. He recognized it instantly. It was the notebook where he and Grace had once written their scattered thoughts, their dreams, their half-formed plans. Carefully, he turned the pages. Their old handwriting met him like an echo. Notes about weekend trips, sketches of imaginary homes, ideas scribbled in haste and laughter. He smiled, reading through the pages, realizing how much he had changed since those words were first written. The person who had written them was still part of him, but he had grown beyond those early dreams. He had shed the weight of grief. He had expanded. There were empty pages at the back of the notebook, spaces waiting to be filled. Elon took a pen from his pocket, pressed the tip to the paper, and began to write. This time, there was no ache in his chest, no tremble in his hand. The words came gently, steadily. "Thank you, Grace, for showing me how to begin. I am writing forward now, not backward. I carry you with me, not as weight, but as light." He closed the notebook carefully and tucked it into his bag. He no longer needed to return to this place to feel close to her. She was with him now, not in memory alone, but in the quiet spaces of his heart that had softened, healed, and made room for more. That evening, Elon gathered with Danielle, Derek, Simon, and their families for dinner. The table was filled with warmth, stories, laughter, the steady hum of life moving forward. Children played nearby. Hands passed dishes, chairs scraped gently against the floor. Elon sat among them, not as an observer, but as someone fully within the circle. There was no moment of realization, no grand revelation, just the quiet truth that he had found a place to belong. A life not perfect, not without scars, but undeniably his. Danielle raised her glass with a gentle smile. "To what's next?" she offered. Elon clinked his glass against hers. "To what's next?" Later that night, Elon sat by his window, reading another letter from Carolina. She wrote of small victories in her music career, of the changing seasons in her village, of the simple beauty in her everyday life. "I think of you often," she wrote, "not with urgency, but with quiet joy. There's always a place for you here, whenever you feel like coming back." Elon smiled, folding the letter carefully. He would write back, of course. Their connection remained, a soft thread stretching gently across continents, neither taut nor frayed. There was no need to rush toward an answer, no need to label what they shared. Some stories, he realized, were meant to unfold slowly, like rivers finding their way. Walking through the streets of Palo Alto, Elon no longer carried the invisible weight that had once bent his shoulders. The city felt lighter, its corners familiar, yet freshly alive. He moved with a steady rhythm, his steps no longer tracing the past, but stepping fully into what awaited. His journey wasn't finished, he knew that. Life would continue to surprise him, to challenge him, to call him into places he hadn't yet imagined. But for the first time, he didn't fear the unwritten pages. He was ready to meet them, with open hands, with a lighter heart, and with the quiet, steady hope that had grown, piece by piece, into something entirely his own. The months that followed settled into a steady, satisfying rhythm for Elon Musk. His company, now fully carrying his name and vision, blossomed beyond the borders of Palo Alto. Orders began arriving from distant cities, then distant countries. Clients in Europe, South America, and Asia were drawn to his clean, thoughtful designs and the quiet sincerity behind his brand story. It no longer surprised Elon that people cared about what he was building, but it still moved him. He wasn't building for the applause. He was building because he finally believed in his own hands. Derek and Simon, without hesitation, stepped in to become true partners in the business. Derek took naturally to logistics, navigating complex supply chains with an ease that surprised even him. Simon, ever the steady presence, found his strength in communication and outreach, skillfully shaping the brand's public image. Together, the three of them worked side by side, not just as friends, but as collaborators, people who trusted each other's instincts, who could argue without breaking, who could share victories without envy. They celebrated each small success as if it were a milestone, gathering in Elon's modest workshop with beers in hand, laughing late into the evenings. Their friendship, once formed in the shadow of Elon's grief, had now stretched into something much larger, a chosen family, a shared home. Danielle remained a quiet, constant presence throughout it all. They would meet for slow walks and long coffees, their conversations meandering from the trivial to the profound. Elon often found himself resting in the comfort of their connection, a friendship that asked nothing of him, that gave him room to simply be. He realized, with time, that what he shared with Danielle was precious precisely because it didn't carry the weight of expectation. It didn't need to be romantic to matter. It didn't need to follow the familiar script. One afternoon, as they strolled through the university gardens, Danielle spoke gently. "I think I'm starting to fall for someone," she confessed, her voice careful but honest. Elon looked at her, surprised at first, then warmed by the trust in her words. "That's wonderful, Danielle. I hope he's someone who sees you for who you really are." She smiled, her bright hazel eyes softening. "Thank you. I just wanted you to know." There was no sting of loss, no undercurrent of disappointment. Elon felt only gratitude that they had built something strong enough to hold this kind of honesty. At the same time, life was unfolding with its usual complexities for his closest friends. Derek, who had once seemed invincible in his marriage, now struggled beneath the quiet weight of distance and miscommunication. One evening, as they sat on Elon's porch with the last light of day slipping away, Derek spoke in halting sentences about the strain in his home. "I don't know when it happened," Derek admitted, his voice thick, "but I think we forgot how to find each other." Elon didn't offer easy answers. He simply listened, knowing that sometimes what we most need is not a solution, but a place to speak without judgment. Simon, too, carried his own quiet burdens. The demands of fatherhood, the sleepless nights, the constant fear of failing. In the safety of their circle, he allowed himself to share his uncertainties. "I thought I'd be better at this," Simon confessed one afternoon, his fingers absently tracing the edge of his coffee cup. "But some days, I feel like I'm disappearing inside it all." "You're showing up," Elon reminded him, echoing the same words he had once offered years ago. "That's enough." Recognizing the need for pause, the three of them planned a weekend away, a quiet escape to a cabin by the lake where they could shed their titles, their responsibilities, and simply remember who they were to each other. They hiked the familiar trails, cooked simple meals, and let the days unfold without structure. They spoke of old stories of wild college days, of the strange turns life had taken. As they sat by the campfire one evening, Derek turned to Elon, his expression unusually serious. "You know," he said, "I think grace brought us here. Not just here to this place, but here, this life, this friendship. I don't think we'd be who we are without her." Elon let the words settle over him, soft and true. He no longer flinched when her name was spoken. Instead, he felt the quiet warmth of gratitude. "She brought us together," Elon agreed. "But we stayed together. We built this." They all understood then that their bond had been forged in the fire of grief, but what remained was no longer shaped by loss. It had grown into something vibrant, something alive. Later that night, Elon sat alone beneath the stars, listening to the crackle of the fading fire. He felt Grace's presence not as a shadow, but as a thread, woven into the fabric of his life, gentle and steady. When he returned to Palo Alto, Elon found a new letter from Carolina waiting for him. She wrote of her growing music career, of small performances that were beginning to draw larger crowds, of the way her songs had begun to carry her further than she had ever imagined. "There are still songs I hope you'll hear," she wrote, "and places I'd love to show you. But there's no need to hurry. I just wanted you to know you are always welcome." Elon folded the letter carefully, smiling at the quiet, patient way their connection continued. There was no rush, no obligación, only the steady hum of a bond that neither time nor distance had weakened. He realized more clearly than ever that love did not always need to follow the paths we expect. It could live in friendship, in shared silences, in letters sent across oceans. It could take its time, unfold in quiet rhythms, refuse to be boxed into categories. The life Elon was building no longer felt like a reconstruction of something lost. It had become something entirely new, crafted not out of desperation but out of choice. He walked the streets of Palo Alto with lightness in his step, the corners now softened with familiarity, the future unfolding without urgency. He was learning day by day that there are many ways to love, many ways to belong, and that life, in its own patient way, would continue offering spaces for joy. The invitation arrived on a quiet morning, nestled among the usual stack of papers and car orders. It was from a well-regarded magazine known for its in-depth profiles of innovators and changemakers. They wanted to feature Elon Musk, not just his company, but his story, his journey, his losses, his rise. Elon hesitated at first. His story wasn't something he had sought to make public. The letters from Grace, the grief, the way those years had shaped him, those were sacred things. But something within him stirred, a gentle push to no longer keep his story hidden, to let it breathe in the open. He accepted the interview. The day of the meeting, Elon sat across from the journalist in his workshop, the place that had seen him rebuild his life piece by piece. The reporter asked the expected questions at first, about design, about innovation, about the growth of his electric vehicle brand. But then came the question that lingered. What do you believe set you on this path? Elon's gaze drifted to the wooden box of Grace's letters, still kept near his desk. Loss, he answered honestly. I lost someone who mattered deeply to me, and she found a way to keep guiding me, even after she was gone. He spoke gently, unfolding the story of Grace, of the letters, of the steps he had taken at her encouragement. He didn't romanticize it, didn't offer it as a grand tragedy, but rather as a quiet, enduring part of his life. He spoke of Carolina, of Danielle, of Derek and Simon, how grief had not isolated him, but had opened unexpected doors. When the interview was published, it resonated deeply. Readers were moved by his vulnerability, by the way he had built something meaningful from his sorrow. His story reached beyond the automotive world. Orders grew, but what mattered more to Elon was the quiet flood of letters he received from strangers who had found comfort in his honesty. Among those who read the piece was his father. Errol reached out that same afternoon, his voice steady but softer than Elon remembered. You told it well, son, Errol said, and I'm proud of the man you've become, not just the businessman. You. Those words, simple and direct, landed with surprising weight. Elon realized then that the approval he had quietly longed for had been there all along, waiting for him to see it. Life moved forward with its familiar rhythm. Derek and his wife reconciled, their hearts finding each other again after a season of distance. Elon joined them for a quiet dinner, watching the ease with which they settled back into shared laughter and familiar touches. Simon embarked on a new project, one that pushed him far outside his comfort zone, and leaned on Elon for counsel in those uncertain early steps. We're not meant to figure this out alone, Simon told him one evening, his words lingering with quiet truth. One day, tucked among his usual correspondence, Elon found a letter from Carolina. Inside were 2 tickets to her upcoming show in Argentina. She had written only a few lines. There's a seat here for you if you'd like it. No pressure, no expectation, just a door that's open. Elon folded the letter carefully and placed it on his desk, his mind quietly turning. He met Danielle later that week for their usual walk through the university gardens. The crisp air carried the scent of late autumn, the trees painted in soft gold and rust. I'm thinking of going back to Argentina, he said as they strolled beneath the changing leaves. Danielle smiled, a soft, knowing expression lighting her hazel eyes. You don't need my permission, Elon. Go. Life isn't waiting. He paused, absorbing her steady support, realizing how deeply he trusted her voice. I don't think I'm chasing anything this time, Elon admitted. I just want to follow what feels right. That's the best reason, she said simply. Elon returned to his workshop with new clarity. He began coordinating the business logistics, ensuring Derek and Simon could manage things in his absence. They didn't hesitate. We've got this, Derek assured him. Go. Live your life. Simon added with a quiet grin, some stories only move forward if you do. For the first time, Elon didn't feel as though stepping away would mean losing his footing. His roots were strong now, woven through friendships, through his work, through the life he had built with deliberate care. These roots didn't tether him. They steadied him, giving him the freedom to dream without fear of falling. He sat at his desk, looking over Carolina's letter once more. His heart didn't race. It didn't ache. It simply felt ready. Elon purchased the ticket with a calm smile, feeling no rush, no urgency, just the steady pull of curiosity, of unfinished songs, of friendships that had waited patiently. He wasn't searching for missing pieces anymore. He was simply following where his story wished to go. When Elon Musk stepped off the plane in Argentina, the air felt different. It wasn't just the climate or the season. It was something softer, something lighter inside him. The first time he had come here, he had carried grief in his bones, his every step heavy with the weight of what he had lost. But this time, he arrived with something closer to curiosity. He wasn't searching for pieces of the past. He was simply open to whatever might unfold. Carolina was waiting at the small arrival's gate, her expression bright, her posture relaxed. She greeted him with a warm hug, familiar and comfortable, but without urgency. There was no expectation in her eyes, no silent question hanging between them. She was simply happy he was here. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. "So am I," Elon replied, and he meant it. Over the next few days, Carolina led him to places they had never visited together. They wandered through quiet neighborhoods, down narrow streets where colorful murals told stories of resilience and love. They visited sunlit courtyards, tucked-away cafes, and local markets rich with spices and music. In the past, the sounds of Argentina had stirred ache in Elon's chest. Now they felt like an invitation. The country no longer pressed on his old wounds. It welcomed him with open arms. One afternoon, as they sat at a small outdoor cafe, Carolina handed him a flyer. "I'm performing here tonight," she said, her smile playful but tentative. "Would you like to come?" Elon looked at the flyer, the name of the local venue printed in soft, curling letters. "I'd like that," he said, surprised at the quiet certainty in his own voice. That evening, he took his seat in the intimate space, his heart calm but awake. When Carolina stepped onto the small stage, guitar in hand, the room seemed to still around her. She sang with a softness that carried weight, her voice threading effortlessly through the quiet crowd. Elon felt something shift within him, not a sudden revelation, but a deep, steady connection to the moment, to the music, to the life he was now fully living. He wasn't thinking of what he had left behind. He wasn't worrying about what might come next. He was simply there. After the performance, they walked together through the quiet streets, the warmth of the night folding around them. Carolina glanced at him, her voice unguarded. "I waited," she said simply. "Not because I expected you to come back. I just left the door open." Elon's chest tightened, not with guilt, but with gratitude. "You never made me feel trapped," he said. "You always gave me space to come to you on my own terms." "That's what you needed," she replied, her gaze steady. "That's what I needed, too." They didn't make promises that night. They didn't label what they were to each other. Instead, they agreed to explore what they felt, lightly, without pressure, letting the story unfold as it wished. The next morning, Elon asked if they could visit the lake again, the place where years before he had left his quiet goodbye to Grace. Carolina drove them there, understanding without needing explanation. The lake looked as it always had, calm, wide, timeless. But to Elon, it no longer felt like a place of farewell. It felt like home. A resting place, not for grief, but for peace. He knelt by the water's edge, reaching into his pocket. He had brought a single flower, simple and small, its petals soft against his fingertips. He placed it gently in the same spot where he had once left his folded note for Grace. "Thank you," he whispered, "for walking with me, for letting me go, for staying with me in the quiet." There was no ache in his chest, no sting behind his eyes, just a profound sense of completion. When he stood, Carolina was waiting a few steps behind him, her hands tucked casually into her jacket pockets, her expression soft and patient. "She would have liked you," Elon said, a quiet smile lifting the corner of his mouth. Carolina's eyes shimmered with warmth. "I think I like her too." They walked together along the lakeside trail, their conversation light but genuine. They spoke of music, of travel, of where life might lead them next. There was no urgency in their words, no roadmap to follow, just a shared understanding that whatever came next would come in its own time. Elon felt something he hadn't fully felt before, a quiet certainty that he didn't need to chase joy or cling to the past. He could meet life where it was, as it arrived. As they wandered through the streets later that evening, the city lights casting a golden hue across the cobblestones, Elon realized this was not a chapter closing. It was a new one beginning, written with slower hands and softer lines. Their connection didn't need to become anything more than what it already was. It could grow, it could shift, it could remain as it was. It didn't need to be defined to be valuable. Elon no longer sought the perfect ending. He had found something better, a beginning that was serene, authentic, and entirely his own. Back in Palo Alto, Elon Musk settled into a rhythm that no longer felt like survival. It felt like life, steady and whole. There was no grand arrival, no moment when he suddenly felt complete. Instead, there was a quiet, day-by-day unfolding, a slow layering of work, friendship, and simple joys that stitched his days together with ease. His company continued to grow, no longer fueled by the need to prove himself, but by the genuine desire to build something thoughtful. Elon participated in automotive expos and industry events, now comfortable standing in those spaces, fully owning his story. His designs carried a certain elegance, purposeful lines, understated details, and they began to catch the attention of those who valued intention over noise. He maintained regular contact with Carolina, their letters and calls flowing naturally, free from pressure or obligation. Sometimes she would send him recordings of her performances, other times just a snapshot of her favorite morning cafe. Their connection was not measured by distance or frequency. It existed quietly, like a familiar melody he could always return to. Derek and Simon remained the unwavering pillars in his life. They celebrated his milestones as if they were their own, and Elon did the same for them. Their friendship had grown past the moments that first tied them together. They no longer simply supported Elon through grief. They shared in his full, complicated, and joyful life. One afternoon, over coffee on Derek's porch, Danielle shared her news. Her eyes sparkled in a way Elon hadn't seen before. "I've met someone," she said, a soft, almost shy smile pulling at her lips. Elon felt no sting, no surprise, only happiness. "You deserve that, Danielle. You really do." They laughed easily, their friendship solid and settled, unshaken by what might have been. Meanwhile, Elon's relationship with his father continued to soften. Errol no longer stood on the periphery of Elon's life. He joined dinners, visited the workshop, even attended Elon's public talks. The sharp edges that had once defined their relationship had worn smooth over time. "You've built something good," Errol told him one evening, not as a formal declaration, but as a quiet truth. "I'm proud of you." Elon smiled, understanding now that these words were not something to chase, but something to hold when they came. With his success came a desire to give back, and Elon soon began investing in Social Project, a local initiative that provided fresh meals to families facing food insecurity. He didn't want grand headlines or public praise. He wanted his work to reach quietly, to matter to people who might never know his name. When he handed out meals on weekends, when he shook hands with volunteers, when he listened to the stories of those standing in line, he felt grace there, not as a memory, but as a living thread in his actions. She would have done this, he thought. She would have loved this. Encouraged by Derek and Simon, Elon began writing a book, not to recount his grief, but to trace his journey through it, to share what it meant to live after loss. It wasn't a story about death. It was about how life continues, reshapes, and softens over time. "You don't have to rush it," Simon told him. "Just write it like you lived it, step by step." Elon smiled at the simplicity of that advice, knowing that's exactly how his story deserved to be told. One day, a new letter arrived from Carolina. She was performing at a festival in Argentina and thought he might like to come. There was no request, no expectation, just an open door. "If you feel like it," she wrote, "there's a place for you here." Elon placed the letter on his desk and sat with the gentle weight of it. The pull was there, but it no longer felt like a tug of urgency. It was an invitation, nothing more. As he walked home that evening, Elon found his mind drifting not toward decisions, but toward reflections. He thought about how love changes its shape, how some people remain with you, not in the form they first arrived, but as something softer, something that travels alongside you, woven into the choices you make, the kindness you offer, the courage to begin again. He realized, fully and deeply, that he didn't need to choose between past and present. Grace was still part of his life, not as a shadow to be overcome, but as a quiet companion who had walked with him to this point and then gently stepped aside. Both stories, the one that had ended and the one that was unfolding, could exist together. Elon no longer searched for the next defining moment. He didn't crave the certainty of labels or the clarity of rigid paths. He understood now that his happiness didn't need a name. It could simply be a morning coffee, a handwritten letter, a friend's laughter across a busy table. In the corners of his life, small reminders of grace still appeared, a flower blooming out of season, a familiar melody playing unexpectedly in a cafe, a stranger's quiet kindness. Elon didn't chase these signs, but he welcomed them when they came, as if the world still whispered in her voice from time to time. His story wasn't finished. He knew that. He still had work to do, roads to travel, friendships to tend, quiet moments to savor. There would be new beginnings and new goodbyes. There will be choices to make, and sometimes he would falter. But he no longer feared the unfolding. As he walked the familiar streets of Palo Alto, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows at his feet, Elon felt something rare, a quiet comfort with who he was, where he had been, and where he was going. The story was still being written, and for the first time, he was perfectly at peace with not knowing how it would end. The soft rhythm of a pen moving across paper became a familiar sound in Elon Musk's home. The words came slowly, carefully, as if they needed to be coaxed into existence, but they came nonetheless. Day after day, he sat at his desk, pouring his story onto the page, not to memorialize his pain, but to honor the journey that had shaped him. The book wasn't just about grace. It wasn't only about loss. It was about the unexpected ways love continued to echo in his life, through friendships, through kindness, through the quiet resilience that carried him forward. He wrote not to close a chapter, but to weave all his chapters together. Derek and Simon became his faithful companions in the process. They read his drafts sometimes aloud, sometimes in silence, offering gentle feedback, sometimes challenging him to go deeper. "Don't hold back," Derek urged one afternoon, leaning over the kitchen counter with a worn copy of Elon's latest pages. "Write it like you lived it. Honest, even the messy parts." Simon, always patient, encouraged him to embrace the unfinished edges. "It's not about the perfect ending," he said. "It's about being real." Their support formed a scaffolding that allowed Elon to build each chapter, brick by careful brick. Elon's father, Errol, who had once been a distant figure on the edge of his life, now found himself carefully reading the first few chapters. Elon hadn't asked him to, but Errol, drawn by quiet curiosity and perhaps a need to understand his son more fully, began to follow the story. One evening, after finishing a draft, Errol closed the folder and sat in thoughtful silence. "You've grown," he said at last, his voice thick with something unspoken. "You've walked through something most people can't describe, and you've done it well." Elon had never needed those words as much as he had once believed, but hearing them now, simply offered, felt like a warm hand resting on his shoulder. As the manuscript took shape, it became clear that this wasn't just a book, it was a quiet testimony about grief, resilience, and the transformative power of love. A story about how endings could also be beginnings. Meanwhile, Danielle remained a steady, caring presence. Her own life was unfolding in new directions, and she often spoke of her growing relationship with tenderness and excitement. Elon listened, genuinely happy for her, their friendship a soft, unwavering current beneath the surface of their lives. When Elon wasn't writing, he continued his involvement in the local food donation project. It wasn't something he did for recognition, it was simply a place where he could offer something back. In the quiet shuffle of distributing meals, in the easy conversations with volunteers and neighbors, Elon felt connected to something larger than himself. Sometimes, as he handed out warm plates, he would think of grace, not with sharp ache, but with a gentle pulse of gratitude. This, he realized, was another way she had stayed with him, not through memory alone, but through the compassion he now carried into the world. One afternoon, a call came from a publishing house that had quietly been following his progress. "We'd like to publish your book," the voice on the other end said. "There's something rare in the way you've written this story. We think it will mean something to people." Elon was surprised, not because he doubted the worth of his words, but because he had never imagined they might find such a wide audience. He had written for himself, for his friends, for those few who had walked this path beside him. With quiet humility, he accepted. When it came time to plan the book launch, Elon chose to keep it small, intimate. He didn't want flashing cameras or grand speeches. He He wanted the people who had truly carried him: Derek, Simon, Danielle, Errol. They gathered in a modest local venue, one filled with soft lighting, rows of simple wooden chairs, and the quiet hum of honest conversation. Before the event began, Elon received a small package from Argentina. Inside was a bouquet of local wildflowers and a handwritten note from Carolina. "I can't be there, but I'm with you. This story, yours, hers, all of it, deserves to be shared. Thank you for telling it." Her words rested gently on his heart. When Elon stood before his friends and the gathered guests, he didn't speak as a man with all the answers. He spoke as someone who had walked a long, winding path and had made peace with not knowing where it would lead. "I didn't write this book to tie things up neatly," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I wrote it because I believe there's value in the journey itself, in asking questions, in stumbling, in learning how to live again." The audience sat in quiet attention, many of them moved by the simple honesty of his words. Derek and Simon, who had lived every step of this story alongside him, took the stage briefly to offer their reflections. "Grace left more than memories," Derek said, his voice catching slightly. "She left a ripple that touched all of us. She reminded us how to love each other better." Simon added, "Sometimes you meet people who leave you too soon. And sometimes you're lucky enough to carry them forward, not in grief, but in gratitude." Elon listened, his heart full, his chest light. At the close of the evening, as the final books were signed and quiet goodbyes were exchanged, Elon stepped outside, the cool air settling gently around him. He looked up at the night sky, not searching for signs, but simply feeling present. There was nothing missing. Grace had never left him, not really. Her presence had shifted, softened, lived now in the choices he made, in the kindness he offered, in the friendships he cherished. Elon smiled a quiet, knowing smile. His story wasn't finished. The chapters ahead were still unwritten, but for the first time, that thought brought him peace. He had built something steady. He had built something good, and perhaps that was enough. The book didn't need to top bestseller lists to make a difference. It settled quietly into the hands of those who needed it, readers who had lost someone, who had wrestled with grief, who had searched for a way to begin again. Elon Musk's story resonated not because it offered neat answers, but because it told the truth about the slow, imperfect process of healing. Letters began to arrive, handwritten notes, emails, quiet messages from strangers who saw themselves in Elon's words. They thanked him for reminding them that love doesn't end with loss, that beginnings are allowed to bloom even after devastating goodbyes. Elon continued to balance his life between the growing success of his electric vehicle brand and his work with the local food donation project. The scale of his work had expanded, but his heart remained grounded in the simple gestures, delivering meals, sharing conversations, building things that felt meaningful. His friendship with Carolina remained a steady thread. Their letters, their phone calls, the occasional exchange of photographs, they flowed naturally, untethered by expectation. Then one day, another invitation arrived. If you ever feel like visiting again, the door is always open. This time, Elon didn't hesitate. He didn't feel the pull of unfinished grief or the urgency of finding answers. He simply wanted to go. His return to Argentina wasn't a journey to the past. It was a step towards something real, something present. Carolina greeted him as before with warmth, but without pressing. They moved through the days gently, visiting places they had once skipped, sharing quiet meals in local cafes, creating memories that belonged only to them. There were no comparisons, no echoes of what had been. Elon no longer measured his experiences against the life he had lost. Grace was with him still, but not as a shadow. She was part of him now, woven into the way he listened, the way he loved, the way he chose to remain open to life. With Carolina, there was space for new stories, new laughter, new silences that didn't ache. Back home, Derek and Simon remained Elon's constant. They celebrated his travels, his work, and the quiet, steady way he had continued to grow. Their friendship, built in the thick of his sorrow, had blossomed into something enduring. When Danielle's wedding day arrived, Elon stood by her side as a friend, proud and full of joy for the life she had found. He didn't feel left behind. He didn't feel anything slipping away. Instead, he saw the beauty in all the ways love could exist, in partnerships, in friendships, in the family we choose. In a gesture that once would have seemed impossible, Errol surprised Elon with a family trip, a small vacation carefully planned to gather them in a way they never had before. On that trip, Elon watched his father lean into laughter, into connection, into the very things he had once kept at arm's length. It was a quiet redemption, a soft closing of an old distance. One afternoon, while organizing some boxes, Elon stumbled upon a bundle of Grace's letters, ones he had read years ago. He sat by the window, the sunlight spilling across the worn paper, and reread them, not out of longing, but out of gentle curiosity. The words hadn't changed, but he had. Where once the letters had been lifelines, guiding him from moment to moment, now they felt like a blessing, soft reminders of a love that had never asked him to stay still. The greatest gift Grace had given him wasn't a path to follow, it was the courage to find his own. As he unfolded the final letter, the one he had read countless times before, his smile came easily. P.S. I'll always be with you. It no longer brought tears. It simply brought peace. Elon returned often to both Palo Alto and Argentina, walking familiar streets, tracing the places where his life had gathered meaning. He didn't walk to remember. He walked because those places had become part of him. He saw Grace in the rhythm of his steps, in the kindness he extended to others, in the way he allowed his story to continue without boundaries. There was no single great love that defined him. There were many. Friendships that stood like pillars. A father who had quietly circled back. A connection with Carolina that needed no label. A woman who had left him letters not to hold him in place, but to set him free. As the film drew to a close, Elon stood at a quiet overlook in Argentina, his gaze soft, steady, and unhurried. The wind brushed through his hair, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden light across the hills. He didn't carry the weight of what had been. He carried the fullness of what remained. The love was still there, it always had been. It didn't stay trapped in letters or memories. It moved forward with him, reshaped, renewed, alive. Love doesn't leave. It becomes the way we walk, the way we love again, the way we open ourselves to the beauty that remains. Elon turned, ready to take the next step, not because he was searching, but because he was at peace with continuing. Love never really leaves us. It simply changes shape and walks beside us in ways we learn to recognize. Dear viewer, now, I would love to hear from you. Did this story awaken a memory, a feeling, or a chapter of your own life? Please share it in the comments. I read and treasure every one of them.